The morning sunlight slipped quietly through the lace curtains of Eleanor Whitmore's small living room, touching the edges of the wooden coffee table where a vase of slightly wilted roses stood. It was early. The clock on the wall had just passed 7:30 a.m., but Eleanor was already awake, sitting in her favorite armchair with a steaming cup of tea between her hands. Today wasn't just any morning. Today was her birthday. 62 years old. Birthdays used to be loud in this house. There had been laughter, friends dropping by with cake, her late husband, Peter, playing her favorite records in the background. And of course, her daughter, Isabella, making a fuss over her with handwritten cards and small surprises. But those days were gone now. Ever since Peter passed away 3 years ago, the house had felt quieter, and Isabella had grown busier. She lived across town with her boyfriend, Nathaniel, and visits had become rare. A quick lunch here, a rushed coffee there. Eleanor didn't blame her. Life moved fast, and she told herself she understood. But deep down, she missed her daughter's presence more than she ever said out loud. As Eleanor took another sip of tea, her phone vibrated on the table. It was a message from Isabella. "Happy birthday, Mom. Meet me at La Maison Café at 2 p.m. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I have a surprise for you." Eleanor smiled instantly. She could almost hear her daughter's voice in those words. A surprise? She couldn't remember the last time someone had planned one for her. She tapped a reply. "Can't wait. See you then, sweetheart." The rest of the morning passed in quiet anticipation. Eleanor picked out her clothes. A soft blue cardigan Peter had once said matched her eyes, a simple white blouse, and a string of pearls she'd saved for special occasions. She took extra care with her hair, brushing it until it fell neatly over her shoulders. Looking in the mirror, she told herself, "It's going to be a good day." By 1:15 p.m., she was ready. She grabbed her purse, made sure her phone was fully charged, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The walk to the bus stop was short, and the streets were lined with golden leaves that crunched under her shoes. When she arrived at La Maison Café at 1:50 p.m., the place was warm and inviting, the windows glowing from the low afternoon sun. The smell of freshly ground coffee and baked pastries drifted through the air. She chose a small table by the window so she could see Isabella arrive. The waitress, a young woman with a kind smile, came over and Eleanor ordered a cappuccino. At 2:05, Eleanor checked the door. No sign of Isabella yet. That was fine, 10 minutes, Isabella had said. She probably just hit a traffic light or two. By 2:15, Eleanor's coffee had cooled slightly. She sipped it slowly, looking out at the street, expecting to see her daughter's familiar figure appear at any moment. By 2:30, she took out her phone and called Isabella. It rang once before going to voicemail. She tried again at 2:35. Straight to voicemail. Maybe her phone died? Maybe she was driving and couldn't answer? Eleanor's heart wanted to believe that. At 3 o'clock, the chair across from her was still empty. She decided to order a slice of lemon cake, her favorite, thinking they could share it when Isabella arrived. The waitress placed it in front of her with a small birthday candle, assuming Eleanor was celebrating. "Someone special coming?" the waitress asked, her tone light. "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "My daughter." By 3:30, Eleanor had called Isabella 5 times. Each time, the same quiet voicemail message. "Hi, it's Isabella. Leave a message." She left one. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm here at the cafe. Are you on your way? Can't wait to see you." At 4 o'clock, the lemon cake was gone, but not because they had shared it. Eleanor had eaten it alone, one small bite at a time, staring out the window between sips of coffee. Her calls to Isabella kept increasing. 8, 12, 15. The cafe began to empty as the afternoon light shifted into evening. Couples finished their late lunches, friends gathered their shopping bags and left. Eleanor remained in her seat, telling herself, just a little longer. At 6 o'clock, the waitress came over again. "Would you like another drink?" Eleanor nodded. "Yes, tea, please." She didn't want to leave, not yet. She kept glancing at the door, hoping to see her daughter's face at any moment. By 7:30, she had called Isabella 25 times. Her hands trembled each time she redialed. The thought crossed her mind. What if something happened to her? That would explain everything. But her chest tightened with another thought. What if nothing happened? What if she just didn't come? By 8 o'clock, the cafe staff began stacking chairs on the empty tables. The young waitress returned, her smile now tinged with pity. "We'll be closing soon." Eleanor nodded, stood up slowly, and walked to the counter to pay her bill. Outside, the air had turned colder, the streetlights casting soft pools of yellow on the sidewalk. She pulled her coat tighter around her and started walking toward the bus stop, her heart heavier with each step. Her birthday, the one she thought would bring her closer to her daughter, had ended with her walking home alone, clutching her purse, her phone battery at 5%, and a hollow ache in her chest. That night, as she lay in bed, she stared at the dark ceiling and whispered to herself, maybe there's a good reason. Maybe she'll explain tomorrow. But deep down, a quiet voice she didn't want to hear was already saying, you were never meant to see her today. Eleanor closed the apartment door behind her and leaned against it for a moment. The quiet inside wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She took off her shoes and placed them neatly by the door. The same thought kept running through her mind. Isabella hadn't come. Not a call, not a text, nothing. She set her purse on the table and walked slowly to the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked in the silence. She filled the kettle and put it on the stove. While it heated, she picked up her phone from her bag and checked again. The last message from Isabella still glowed on the screen. Meet me at La Maison Café at 2 p.m. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I have a surprise for you. It felt strange now, reading it again. This morning, it had made her happy. Now it felt like a joke she didn't understand. She sat at the kitchen table, the phone in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the call button. Should she try again? She'd already called so many times at the cafe. But what if something had happened? She pressed call. Straight to voicemail. Hi, it's Isabella. Leave a message. Eleanor waited for the beep. Hi, sweetheart. It's Mom. I'm home now. I waited for you at the cafe. I hope you're all right. Call me when you can. She ended the call and stared at the phone for a few seconds before setting it down. The kettle whistled softly. She made herself a cup of tea, holding the mug between her hands for warmth, but her stomach didn't feel like drinking. She went to the living room and sat on the sofa. Across from her, on the bookshelf, was a photo of Isabella when she was 7, sitting at the kitchen table with frosting all over her mouth, laughing at something Eleanor had said. Back then, birthdays were loud and happy. Peter would play music, Isabella would sing along, and the house would smell like cake for hours. Now the house just smelled faintly of tea. At 9 p.m., she tried again. Voicemail. At 9:30 again. No answer. She typed a short text. Are you okay? Please call me. She stared at it for a while before hitting send. The minutes crawled by. She picked up a book, but couldn't focus on the words. She folded the blanket on the sofa, then unfolded it again. At one point, she stood by the window and looked out at the quiet street. A few people walked by, talking softly. A car passed slowly, headlights sweeping over the buildings. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and her heart jumped, but it was just a calendar reminder about her book club on Thursday. She closed it without reading more. By 11 o'clock, the phone call count had reached over 30. She told herself she wouldn't try again tonight. She would wait until morning. But she didn't sleep much. She lay in bed, the phone on the nightstand, screen facing up. Every time a car went by outside or a pipe creaked in the building, she opened her eyes. A dozen times she reached for the phone, only to set it back down without touching it. By the time the first light of morning came through the curtains, Eleanor had made up her mind. She needed to see her daughter. She couldn't spend another day wondering. She got dressed, pulled on her gray sweater, and brushed her hair until it lay smooth over her shoulders. She put her phone and wallet into her purse and locked the apartment behind her. The bus stop was only 2 blocks away. The air was crisp and cool, the kind that made her cheeks pink. The ride across town felt longer than usual. She looked out the window, her thoughts moving between hope and dread. Maybe Isabella had been sick. Maybe there had been some mix-up. Maybe there was a good reason. When the bus stopped near Isabella's building, Eleanor stepped onto the sidewalk and looked up at the modern glass balconies. She walked to the door and greeted the doorman politely. I'm here to see Isabella Whitmore, she said. He buzzed her in without question. Inside, the elevator was quiet except for the hum of its motor. Eleanor looked at her reflection in the stainless steel doors. She saw a woman trying to stay calm, her lips pressed together, her eyes tired from a night of worry. The elevator opened onto a carpeted hallway. She walked to the door marked 3C. The doormat had 2 white daisies printed on it. Eleanor smiled faintly. Isabella had loved daisies when she was a little girl. She knocked gently. No answer. She knocked again, a bit louder. From inside, she thought she heard laughter. Quick, bright laughter that didn't sound tired or sick. She stood very still, listening. Then she heard footsteps. The lock turned, and the door opened to reveal Nathaniel. He was wearing a crisp shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. His hair was slightly messy, as if he'd been in the middle of a party or gathering. "Eleanor," he said, his voice polite but surprised. "Hi. We weren't expecting you. Is everything okay?" Behind him, she could see into the apartment, balloons, a table covered with food, a cake with unlit candles. And then she heard it, Isabella's voice, warm and cheerful, calling from inside. "Who is it, Nate?" Eleanor's hands tightened on the strap of her purse. Something in her chest began to sink. She didn't know yet what was going on, but she was about to find out. The singing filled the air before Eleanor even crossed the threshold. It came in uneven waves, the voices warm and cheerful, but each note felt like a little shove against her chest. She stepped inside slowly, the sound of the door clicking shut behind her sharper than it should have been. The apartment smelled of vanilla frosting, perfume, and something savory from the kitchen. Balloons drifted lazily near the ceiling, their ribbons swaying like small, careless gestures. Nathaniel moved a step ahead, glancing over his shoulder as if unsure whether to guide her in or keep her near the door. Eleanor's eyes moved past him, scanning the room. The living area was bright, sunlight spilling in from the wide balcony doors. In the center stood a table covered in a white lace cloth, dotted with plates of hors d'oeuvres, glasses half filled with champagne, and the centerpiece, a large frosted cake topped with gold candles that flickered in the late morning light. Isabella stood beside it, laughing, a sparkler in her right hand and a small dessert plate in the other. Her dark hair was swept into a loose updo, a few strands falling softly along her face. She looked radiant, more radiant than Eleanor had seen her in years. Around her were half a dozen people Eleanor didn't recognize, friends of Nathaniel's, maybe, or extended family. And then there was Vivian Pierce. Vivian stood at the head of the table, wearing an elegant cream blouse and pearl earrings, her lipstick a deep red that matched her polished nails. She was leaning slightly toward Isabella as Isabella adjusted the candles on the cake. Vivian's smile was calm, pleased, the kind of smile people wear when they feel entirely at home in the center of attention. No one had noticed Eleanor yet. The singing carried on, "Happy birthday to you," and she stayed at the edge of the living room, invisible in plain sight. When the song ended, there was applause, the pop of another champagne cork, and the soft cheer of glasses clinking together. Isabella leaned in and kissed Vivian on the cheek, saying something that made the older woman laugh. It was then that Isabella finally saw her mother. For a moment, her smile faltered, her eyes widening just enough for Eleanor to notice. The sparkler in her hand burned down to a stub, and she set it quickly on a plate. "Mom," she said, her voice lighter than her expression. "What are you doing here?" The words were ordinary, but the tone carried something else, surprise, uncertainty, maybe even guilt. Eleanor took a breath, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I came to see you. I was worried." She paused, letting the sentence settle before adding, "You didn't come yesterday." The room had gone quieter now, the background chatter thinning as people began to sense the shift. Nathaniel hovered at the side, pretending to tidy a stack of napkins, but clearly listening. Vivian's smile had cooled, her eyes moving from Eleanor to Isabella, and then back again. Isabella's shoulders stiffened. "Mom, yesterday was complicated." She glanced toward Vivian, as if for silent permission to go on. It was Nathaniel's mom's birthday. We decided to keep it small." "Small," Eleanor repeated, her eyes sweeping over the decorated table, the balloons, the 24 cupcakes neatly arranged on a tray. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of the word landed in the space between them. "So you told me to wait at a cafe. Alone. For hours." Isabella's jaw tightened. "I didn't want to hurt you. She broke off, looking down at her plate. Vivian stepped forward then, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "I told Isabella the first wanted this to be a family moment," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "She thought it might be less awkward if it were just us." The phrasing was polite, but the meaning was blunt. "You are not part of this family moment." Eleanor met Vivian's gaze. There was no malice there, just a calm certainty, the kind that doesn't expect to be challenged. It made something inside Eleanor go still. She turned back to Isabella. "So instead of telling me the truth, you sent me on a little errand to keep me out of the way?" Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Isabella's lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched until one of the guests shifted uncomfortably and murmured something to another. Eleanor felt the weight of every eye in the room. She wanted to disappear, to fold herself into something so small no one could see her hurt. But she stood there instead, holding the gaze of the daughter who couldn't meet hers. She thought of the morning before, how she had chosen her cardigan, brushed her hair until it shone, walked to the cafe with a lightness she hadn't felt in months. How she had sat there believing her daughter was on her way, that they would spend the afternoon together, that maybe this birthday would feel less lonely than the last. And how, all the while, Isabella had been here, lighting candles for someone else. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "I understand." The words were simple, but they carried an edge, like paper-cutting skin. She didn't wait for a reply. She turned toward the door. No one stopped her. Nathaniel stepped aside without a word. The hallway outside was cool and smelled faintly of lavender from the building's air fresheners. She pressed the elevator button and felt the tremor in her own hands. When the doors opened, she stepped in and faced forward, refusing to look back. As the elevator descended, the quiet wrapped around her again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the stillness of an empty home. It was the quiet that comes after something has been decided. When the doors opened to the lobby, she walked through without a glance at the doorman. The sunlight outside was too bright after the apartment's warm glow, but she welcomed it. She didn't hurry. She didn't need to. The walk to the bus stop felt longer than usual. Each step seemed to press the truth deeper into her, that the daughter she had raised, loved, and believed in had chosen not to include her, and worse, had chosen to lie about it. Eleanor didn't cry. She thought she might later, but not here. Not where the street smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and the leaves crunched under her shoes. She kept her head up, though the ache in her chest pulsed with every breath. By the time the bus arrived, she had already decided she wouldn't call tonight. She wouldn't explain how much it hurt. She wouldn't give Isabella the chance to soften the edges with half-truths or excuses. For now, she would go home, make herself a cup of tea, and sit with the quiet. Not because she wanted to, but because it was hers. The bus hissed to a stop outside Eleanor's block just after midday. The air had turned cool, and the sunlight that had seemed too bright when she left Vivian's apartment now felt thinner, softer. She stepped down from the bus and adjusted the strap of her purse on her shoulder. Her building stood quietly at the end of the street, the brick warmed faintly by the sun. Inside, the familiar smell of the hallway greeted her, floor polish, faint cooking smells from a neighbor's lunch, the scent of the potted fern Mrs. Patel kept by the elevator. She let herself into her apartment, turned the key in the lock, and stood for a moment in the stillness. Nothing had changed here. The mug she had left in the sink yesterday still waited to be washed. The throw blanket on the sofa lay folded in its precise square. The vase of roses on the table had grown more tired, petals curling inward as if they, too, had something to keep to themselves. She set her purse down, slipped off her coat, and hung it neatly by the door. The first thing she did was fill the kettle and set it on the stove. Tea, she thought. Tea could hold the day together, even if the day itself felt like it had come apart in her hands. As the water heated, she opened the closet in the hallway and pulled down a large cardboard box from the top shelf. It was heavier than she remembered. She carried it to the living room and set it on the coffee table. The lid came off with a dry shuffle. Inside were the photo albums she had kept since Isabella was born. The first one, its cover pale pink and a little worn at the edges, was filled with the earliest years. Isabella in a knitted bonnet, in the bathtub grinning up at the camera, her first day at school with a backpack half her size. Eleanor's fingers moved slowly over each plastic sleeve. She didn't cry. Not yet. The kettle whistled softly from the kitchen, but she stayed where she was, flipping to the album from Isabella's teenage years. School concerts, family holidays, a photo from the summer they'd gone camping and gotten caught in the rain, laughing under a tarp. And then the university years. Eleanor and Peter standing proudly beside Isabella on graduation day, her cap crooked, cheeks flushed with happiness. She closed the album and set it aside. The kettle's whistle grew louder, insistent. She went to the kitchen, poured the water over a tea bag in her favorite blue mug, and carried it back to the sofa. Steam curled into the air, warm against her face. She held the mug in both hands, letting the heat soak into her palms. She sat there for a long while, the box of albums beside her. These were pieces of a story she had believed would always have her in it, center stage or close to it. But now, looking at the careful snapshots, she saw something else. Her role had been shrinking for years. Yesterday had only made it obvious. By late afternoon, the light in the room had shifted, shadows stretching longer across the floor. The phone on the table buzzed once, startling her. She leaned forward to check. It was a message from Isabella. "Mom, I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't mean to hurt you. Can we talk?" Eleanor read it twice, then set the phone down. She didn't reply. Not yet. She stood and carried the box of albums to the bedroom, sliding it under the bed. They would be safe there, out of sight but not gone. She needed space between herself and those frozen smiles. Back in the living room, she pulled out a notebook from the drawer in her writing desk. The pages were half filled with grocery lists and reminders, but she turned to a clean page and began to write. Not a letter, not a reply to Isabella, just a list. Join the Wednesday book club. Visit the art museum downtown. Call Joan about the gardening group. Take the train to the coast before winter. The act of writing felt like taking a breath after holding it for too long. Evening came quietly. She made herself a simple dinner, tomato soup and buttered toast, and ate it at the kitchen table. She didn't check her phone. She didn't feel the pull she usually did. Instead, she washed her dishes, dried them, and put them away, the small routine anchoring her in the present. Later, as she sat in her armchair with a book, the phone rang. The sound was sharp in the stillness. She let it ring. When it stopped, the voicemail light blinked. She listened to it once, standing by the table. "Mom, please, I just want to explain. I didn't mean." The message cut off there, ending in a faint sigh. Eleanor pressed delete. She didn't feel cruel. She felt clear. She looked around her small apartment. The shelves lined with books, the framed print Peter had given her one anniversary, the rug she'd found at a flea market years ago. It was hers, all of it, every corner and color. And tonight, she realized she could fill it with whatever she wanted. The next morning, she woke early, sunlight touching the curtains just as it had the day before. She made tea, opened the windows to let in the crisp air, and pulled out her notebook again. She added another line to the list. Plan my own birthday next year. She imagined it for a moment, not a waiting game in a cafe, not hoping for someone to arrive. A dinner with friends from the book club, maybe. Or a day trip somewhere she'd always wanted to go. The details didn't matter yet. What mattered was that it would be hers, start to finish. She didn't stop loving Isabella. She knew she never would. But love didn't mean waiting by a phone that stayed silent, or accepting a seat outside the celebration. Love, she realized, could also mean stepping back, giving space, and choosing herself when someone else would not. That afternoon, she went to the bookstore downtown and bought a new novel, one she'd heard about on the radio. She stopped at the bakery on the corner and bought a single slice of lemon cake. Back home, she put the cake on a plate, lit a small candle from the drawer, and set it in the middle. She sang softly to herself, just a few lines, enough to make her smile. When she blew out the candle, she didn't make a wish. She didn't need to. She already knew what she wanted, and for the first time in a long while, she trusted herself to give it.